Hello and welcome to my review of The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. The Lost World was released in 1912 and some of the main characters would recur in adventures featuring or centred around Professor Challenger. The Lost World is one of the earliest novels in the Lost Worlds genre and features two professors, a journalist and a gentleman explorer, as they attempt to prove or disprove Professor Challenger's belief that there is, in South America, a remote plateau on which geological conditions have allowed dinosaurs to continue to exist. The novel, with one or two minor diversions, is narrated in the first person by a journalist called Edward Malone. He proposes to the vacuous dullard Gladys, who tells him that she is only interested in marrying a man whose heroic exploits will reflect favourably on her. While Malone acknowledges that some will consider this chapter superfluous, it is actually essential to the motivation of all that follows. But further, the subtext for the exchange touches on themes that would be current in the era, the growing push for gender equality, for example, and what that might mean for future society. Malone is subservient to Gladys, who is a vacuous woman driven by little more than whims and nonsense, yet Malone is on his knees before her and begging for her attention. Just say the word, teetotal, vegetarian, aeronaut, theosophist, Superman, I'll have a try at it, Gladys, if you'll only give me an idea of what would please you. In more modern times, we have a popular word for this sort of behaviour, yet Gladys does actually speak eloquently on the heart of the matter. There are heroisms all around us waiting to be done. It's for men to do them and for women to reserve their love as a reward for such men. And that doesn't sound completely removed from certain modern dialogues either, though the word heroism is perhaps replaced with something less appealing. But this book came into the world when change seemed around every corner. The great explorer Henry Stanley has recently passed. King Edward's reign had been brief. The peak and degradation of man, the end of empire, were hot topics. And here we have Gladys, of all people, telling mankind, or at least the male half of it, to buck up and get on with it. And there's still room for, and the expectation of, something great to be done. And it is thus chastised that Malone asks his editor for a dangerous mission in order that he might prove his mettle and impress Gladys. The most dangerous task that the editor can think of is to send Malone to interview Professor Challenger, who despises and assaults journalists. Professor Challenger has recently returned from exploring South America and made some assertions whose rebuttal by the scientific community has left him extremely short-tempered. Malone pretends he's a student, but not very well, and rumbled, he gets into a rumble with the professor. A policeman's intervention stops things getting worse, and when Malone protects Challenger from further police action, the professor warms to him a little and invites him to a talk later that week. At that talk, Challenger asserts that he has found a place in South America where dinosaurs continue to exist. He is challenged by Professor Summerlee, among others. An expedition to prove or disprove Challenger's claims are proposed, and Malone volunteers along with Summerlee and Lord John Roxton. Roxton has been to South America previously, where he ended some slavery on the Amazon, winning friends and a few enemies in the process. Malone, Summerlee and Roxton set off for South America with sealed instructions they are sworn not to open until a certain time and place. When they do, they discover the instructions are blank, but they are then joined by Challenger, and he'd created the scheme with the blank diversions in order to avoid travelling with the other people. With the aid of a few locals and some hired help, they travel the Amazon and reach the plateau, but they are unable to climb it. Summerlee and Challenger squabble like children the entire way, and Summerlee is determined to prove Challenger as a fraud even after a pterodactyl steals their lunch. Naturally, Challenger finds a way to the plateau. They climb a nearby hill topped by a large tree and fell it to use it as a bridge. No sooner are they across, however, than one of the indigenous guides destroys the bridge and strands them. He reveals himself to be one of Roxton's enemies in the area, and his revenge is to strand them all forever and at the mercy of the bad spirits believed to live in the area. The four of them build a camp and set off to explore. And here we find quite an interesting stylistic phenomenon, because in more recent times it's fairly common to end a chapter with something of a hook to make the reader want to read on. But Doyle seems to want to do things slightly different, preferring to begin a chapter in that way. Each chapter is intended, in whole or part, to be one of Malone's letters to his editor back in Britain, so perhaps that explains it, but there are a series of chapter headings designed to hook. 9. Who could have foreseen it? The obscuring pronoun here generating a mystery further to the implied problem. It's basically the stuff of YouTube clickbait thumbnails. And while this is repeated in the first line of the chapter, it does also demonstrate somewhat the different era that this was written in. These 3 opening lines are all great starters. A dreadful thing has happened to us. Who could have foreseen it? I cannot foresee any end to our troubles. No men have ever found themselves in a worse position, nor is there any use in disclosing to you our exact geographical situation and asking our friends for a relief party. We are, in truth, as far from any human aid as if we were on the moon. But all 3 are in fact just the first lines of 3 lengthy paragraphs that takes up the entire first page of chapter 9. A more modern, and not to say better writer, I think, would have been far more succinct, and you can certainly make a case that once that hook is made, belabouring it only serves to lose the fish. Malone insists that they are being watched the whole time, but the jungle is so thick that they can't be sure. While exploring, Challenger is spotted by a flock of pterodactyls and they're attacked. At night, a ferocious, toad-like dinosaur breaks into their camp and is sent fleeing when Roxton attacks it with a torch. Malone considers that things perhaps aren't dangerous enough, or perhaps he's just resolutely stupid, and he walks off in the middle of the night to explore by himself. He discovers that in the dark he's accidentally brought the wrong gun for the ammunition he's carrying, but he carries on anyway in case the people that didn't see him sneak out think he's a coward when he sneaks back while they're sleeping. He makes it all the way to the lake in the centre of the plateau and discovers that there are fires in the nearby caves, surmising that there must be humans living in them. He decides to return to the camp, but is chased by the same dinosaur from before, who knew that that was there, and he only survives after falling into a pit dug by those humans in order to trap and kill that very dinosaur. Recovering his senses, his wits presumably reduced by half, he returns to the camp and finds it has been trashed and that all of his friends are gone. He sleeps there overnight, being woken by dishevelled Roxton in the morning. The 2 of them then hide in the woods, and Roxton relates, while they're being quiet to avoid being captured, that there is a trabe of ape men living nearby who have attacked the camp and took the 3 others prisoner while Malone was gone. They're apparently fighting a war against the humans. Their chief, however, has spotted a likeness between him and Challenger and spared him, but he still intends to throw the others off the cliff, which is what passes for entertainment among them. Roxton and Malone attack the ape village and free their friends and a small group of captured humans. They return to their caves and are welcomed warmly. One of those that they have rescued is then revealed as the Human King's son. The humans consider that the aid of the explorers, especially their guns, might help them wipe out the apes, and the explorers agree. There is a battle, but for once the usually verbose Conan Doyle seems rather concise. Summerlee's brush with death is utterly matter-of-fact and barely crosses even into a second line. One of them knocked Summerlee's rifle to matchwood, and the next would have crushed his skull had an Indian not stabbed the beast to the heart. The near rout of the human army, and coming within a whisker of total failure, is likewise quite perfunctory. Once our allies broke under the pressure, and had it not been for the execution done by our rifle, they would certainly have taken to their heels, but they were gallantly rallied by their old chief and came back on with such a rush that the ape men began in turn to give way. Neither Summerlee's near disaster or the old chief's heroics are given enough time to breathe. It's almost as if Conan Doyle is determined that there should be no excitement in his exciting moments, though Malone's flight from the dinosaur was given far more time to build and raise the reader's pulse a little. Here he gives far more time and space to Challenger's speech on the wonders of watching the superior race, as in humanity, assert its position, a return to those early themes that instigated the expedition. What, my friends, is the conquest of one nation by another? It is meaningless. Each produces the same result, but those fierce fights when in the dawn of ages the cave dwellers held their own against the tiger folk, or the elephants first found they had a master, those were the real consequences, the victories that count. In the battle, though, firearms win over bare arms, and the humans are happy to look after their new friends. But Malone correctly realises that they are refusing to help them leave because of the benefit of having them around, especially fighting off occasional dino attacks. However, Challenger builds a hot air balloon out of a dinosaur's stomach and uses a nearby hydrogen vent to fill it. It flies off on its test run without any of them on board, but he's confident he can build another one, even though none of the others are exactly keen to go on it. It all proves moot, however, because the King's son reveals a cave leading back down, and they arrive, reunited with their incredibly patient native guides, just as a rescue team arrives for them. Returning home, the explorers are treated with great celebration, even if there is a near riot when several of their peers disbelieve their findings. At the town hall where things are being discussed, Challenger demonstrates his extraordinary genius by releasing a pterodactyl. It flies off. Who knew they could do that? But here, unlike in the battle scene, Conan Doyle does seem to want to generate some excitement. Faster and faster it flew, beating against the walls and chandeliers in a blind frenzy of alarm. "The window! For heaven's sake, shut the window!" roared the professor from the platform, dancing and wringing his hands in an agony of apprehension. Alas, his warning was too late. In a moment, the creature, beating and bumping along the walls like a huge moth within a gas shade, came upon the opening, squeezed its hideous bulk through it, and was gone. Here we can see Conan Doyle shortening his sentences, switching in present participles, and alliterating, all in an attempt to enliven this scene, though, oddly, the danger here is far less than before. But it is a much more interesting piece of writing when compared to the battle scene, where he does none of those things. With the pterodactyl last seen heading out to sea, Malone returns to Gladys and finds her married to a solicitor who is completely devoid of heroics, but, one assumes, rich enough. Unfortunately for her, Roxton's findings in South America are worth a whole ton of ready cash too. He announces he's returning to the Lost World, and Malone volunteers to go with him. In conclusion, this effort from 1912 was not the first Lost World book, coming nearly 50 years after Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth, but swiftly followed as it was by Edgar Rice Burroughs' At the Earth's Core. It did help popularise the genre. No doubt just the experience of exploring the Lost Plateau through the guide of Malone's narration would have been exciting to audiences in a world undergoing change. With the great explorer Henry Stanley dying just 8 years before and the Empire of Victoria passing through Edward's hands to King George and territorially about to approach its peak, there must have been a sense of what next in the collective zeitgeist. Where do we explore? How do we grow? Which are the themes the book touches on when Challenger discusses the positioning of the animals and man after the human-ape war is resolved. However, time has moved on, and with it so have audiences' expectations. I think to more modern audiences, The Lost World may well seem quite pedestrian, lacking an incident for all its florid setting. Such incidents as there are mainly confined to the second half of the book, the first detailing the circumstances of arranging the expedition and inciting it. Perhaps somewhat oddly, it was actually the first half, so the first quarter, in fact, of the book that I enjoyed the most. Malone's feminine weakness spurring his resolve to win his love in a more masculine pursuit, his interaction with the rambunctious Professor Challenger were all wryly amusing and good fun. I didn't think that the full adventure maintained that energy, and some of the decisions made along the way defied belief. But ultimately, this isn't one of those classics that gets recommended purely by reputation or for their influential status within a genre. The pace is somewhat short of ideal, especially 100 years on from when it was written, but The Lost World is generally good fun. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more.